I should have been recording this all along. Okay, let's see. Katie, let's see, who all did the Vulture? Did anybody do the Vulture yet? Okay, Katie, can you say the Vulture for us?
Yes.
And I guess you know that man is, I think this is like one of the coolest names I've ever heard of. Hilaire Belloc.
Bellark or something.
Hilaire Belloc. I mean, what a name is that? I don't know. I just think it's very cool. Okay, let's see how you can do, Katie.
The Vulture by Hilaire. Yeah, that person. The Vulture.
Hilaire Belloc.
Hilaire, but I'm sorry.
Belloc. Okay.
The Vulture eats between his meals, and that's the reason why he very, very rarely feels as well as you or I. His eye is dull, his head is bald, his neck is growing thinner. Oh, what a lesson to us all to only eat at dinner.
Woo! That is a great poem. Okay, so we're all going to look at this and then and we're going to do it a few times and then we're going to practice it, okay? Because we've made it this far. Okay, The Vulture by Hilaire Belloc. The vulture eats between his meals, and that's the reason why he very, very rarely feels as well as you or I. His eye is dull. His head is bald, his neck is growing thinner. Oh, what a lesson for us all to only eat at dinner. Okay, let's see. I'm going to read it again. Everybody just follow along and look at your book while I read it, okay? Are you having technical problems there, Maya?
I think we got it.
Okay, all right. Okay, so I'm going to read it again. Does everybody have their book handy?
Yes.
Okay.
I need to go get mine.
Okay, run, go get it.
It's right here. I'm sorry. I just noticed it dropped.
Okay. The Vulture by Hilaire Belloc. Y'all just read along silently as I say it, okay? The vulture eats between his meals, and that's the reason why he very, very rarely feels as well as you or I. His eye is dull. His head is bald. His neck is growing thinner. Oh, what a lesson for us all to only eat at dinner. Okay, who would like to also read it? Not try to say it, but actually read it off of the page.
Me.
Okay, Anirudh, you go.
The Vulture by Hilaire Belloc. Okay.
Hilaire Belloc.
Hilaire Belloc. The vulture eats between his meals, and that's the reason why. He very, very rarely feels as well as you or I. His eye is dull, his head is bald, his neck is growing thinner. Oh, what a lesson for us all to only eat at dinner.
Excellent job reading that. That is fantastic. Okay, who else can read it off the page for us? Maya, that looks like a volunteer to me. Okay, I'll let you go.
The vulture eats between his meals.
Okay, say the title and then say the author's name. Okay, and it's Hilaire Belloc. I think it's Hilaire. Is it Hillary or is it Hilaire? I think it's Hilaire.
I've never heard this.
You never heard it? Okay, well, it's on your recording, so go ahead. We'll just say Hilaire for now.
By Hilaire Belloc.
Mm-hmm.
The vulture eats between his meals, and that's the reason why he very, very rarely feels as well as you or I. His eye is dull, his head is bald, his neck is growing thinner. Oh, what a lesson for us all to only eat at dinner.
Excellent job reading that. Okay, Katie, now I know you've been working on memorizing this, but I still want you to read it, okay? All right.
Okay. The vulture eats...
Say the title and the author.
The Vulture by Hilaire Belloc.
We'll have to listen to the recording and see how Andrew says that, but go ahead.
The vulture eats between his meals, and that's the reason why he very, very rarely feels as well as you or I. His eye is dulled. Sorry.
Keep going, you're doing well.
His head is bald. His neck is growing thinner. Oh, what a lesson for us all to only eat at dinner.
Excellent job. I really love the expression that y'all are using for this. Okay, now I'm going to test everybody. I'm only going to leave one word off the end of each sentence, okay? All right. The Vulture by Hilaire. Remember the name? Belloc. Okay. The vulture eats between his
Meals.
And that's the reason
Why?
he very, very rarely
Feels.
as well as you or
I.
his eye is dull, his head is
bald,
Bald.
his neck is growing.
thinner,
Oh, what a lesson for us all to only eat.
at
Dinner.
dinner.
Ta-da! And so you're on your way to having that memorized. Okay, it sounds like, Katie, that you've been working on after the party,
Yes.
and you said the kids really loved that.
Yeah.
Okay. Well,
They
let's,
really
Huh?
mainly because I make it like so much, I don't know, theatrical with my facial expressions. And they
uh-huh.
really that.
These poems are great for, yes, entertaining children, or entertaining your grandparents, or entertaining your friends. And of course, they get more complex as we go. So these first few especially are great for young children, okay? So here's After the Party. Now, are you finished memorizing this one, Katie, or are you just working on it?
I'm finished.
Okay, I want you to just read it to us, okay?
Okay. After the Party by William Wise. Jonathan Blake ate too much cake. He isn't himself today. He's tucked up in bed with a feverish head, and he doesn't much care to play. Jonathan Blake ate too much cake and 3 kinds of ice cream too. From his latest reports, he is quite out of sorts, and I am sure the reports are true. I'm sorry to state that he also ate 6 pickles, a pie, and a pear. In fact, I confess, it's a reasonable guess. He ate practically everything there. Yes, Jonathan Blake ate too much cake, so he's not at his best today. But there's no need for sorrow. If you come back tomorrow, I'm sure he'll be out to play.
Oh my goodness, what an excellent job you did reading that. No wonder the kids get so cracked up. That is fantastic. All right, do you want to try it without looking at it?
Yes.
Okay. I love your expression. Okay.
Jonathan Blake by After the Party, by
okay.
Will Wise. Jonathan Blake ate too much cake, so he isn't himself today. He is tucked up in bed with a feverish head, and he doesn't much care to play. Jonathan Blake ate too much cake and 3 kinds of ice cream too. From his latest reports, he is quite out of sorts, and I am sure the reports are true. I'm sorry to state that he also ate 6 pickles, a pie, and a pear. In fact, I confess it's a reasonable guess that he ate practically everything there. Yes, Jonathan Blake ate too much cake, so he isn't his best today. But there's no need for sorrow. If you come back tomorrow, I'm sure he'll be out to play.
Yay, that is amazing. Good job. Okay, so for our TV audience who might actually watch this on YouTube one of these days, I would like to give everybody the opportunity to recite ooey gooey because I didn't have the recording on, and then we're going to move on to our next thing, okay?
Okay.
All right. So who would like to go first with ooey gooey, the poem number 1?
Me.
Okay, Anirudh, have a go.
Ooey gooey, author unknown. Ooey gooey was a worm, a mighty worm was he. He stepped upon the railroad tracks, the train he did not see. Ooey gooey.
Excellent job. Okay, now y'all, we're going to start practicing this when you're reciting, and I did see y'all doing this, but it takes some thinking because sometimes you're having to think really hard about the poem. But when you can, I want you to look into the camera or either look at us on the screen, whichever is easier for you to do, okay? All right, let's see who wants to go next. Maya, would you like to go next?
Sure. Ooey Gooey by author unknown. Ooey Gooey was a worm, a mighty worm was he. He stepped upon the railroad tracks, the train he did not see. Ooey Gooey.
Good job. Okay, Katie.
Okay.
Put that same kind of expression in that you used with the after the party one.
Okay. Ooey Gooey, by author unknown. Ooey Gooey was a worm, a mighty worm was he. He stepped upon the railroad tracks, the train he did not see. Ooey Gooey.
I'll bet the children start laughing and hollering when you say that, right?
Yeah.
Okay, it's really fun to be able to say poems. So I did recite part of the poem that I memorized when I was in 5th grade to y'all, didn't I?
Yeah.
Just for Christmas?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right. Yes, once you memorize them, they're yours permanently. Okay, so I have Katie's work here that she did. So we're just gonna, okay, let's look at this together because this is really excellent. How I love how you filled in the, or your mom did, filled in the actual information on this checklist. So let's just all look at it together here. And it looks like Katie and her mom are reading The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. Okay, so let me share this with you. Okay, all right. For some reason, her stuff wouldn't show up on Adobe, but it shows up on Power PDF. So, and so I see that your mom has verified that you do your oral report, your reading aloud, and your poetry practice, and have her sign it every day. And you all are reading The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, and you are poems 1 through 5 have been memorized. That is excellent. And so that's very good note taking there. And then we have the rest of the PDF here with each keyword outline. Quite impressive there. Very happy with that. Okay, so Katie, how far have you all gotten with The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe?
We're like halfway through the book right now.
How do you like it?
I love it. I am so excited to read it every time she gets back from work. I'm like, you sit down right now and we're reading.
And so how long do you read each day?
I read for 20 minutes, and then sometimes if I'm like really exuberant and excited to read, which I usually am, I read for like another 20 or 15 minutes.
Okay, so are y'all taking turns reading, or is she reading and you're listening, or how are y'all doing it?
I'm reading and she's listening, and then actually we're also reading Harry Potter again. So she's reading Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix to me for 20 minutes.
Wow, y'all are doing a lot of reading. Okay. Listening to literature being read aloud is really good. I mean, it's good to read it yourself too, but I do want y'all to do listening with your editor reading, just like Katie's just now talking about. But if you also want to do some reading, that will be fine too. My son and I did that kind of reading when he was in high school, and all my other two kids had already gone off to other educational things. We weren't doing homeschooling anymore. And so we read so many books that way. I either read them out loud, and we did history that way too. We had a great history book, and I would just read it, and he would take notes while I was reading it. And then we always had a literature book that we were working on. So it's a great way to improve your reading and your listening skills, and to cover a lot of ground in reading. Okay, Maya, so what book are you all working on reading?
I'm going to read Black Beauty.
Oh, okay. Have you got started on it yet?
Not yet.
Okay, so
I have read it before.
Okay, so I want all students to have some read alouds with their parents reading each day. So you make sure that, and then write down on the checklist about what it is you're working on, okay? Anirudh, what did you pick?
Wait, for which one?
For the reading aloud.
I picked I think I picked My Gift.
My Gift, or is that a book y'all are reading, or?
I think it's a book. I'm not sure.
Okay, so, okay, your mom said that you all might do the reading aloud, even though, you know, that's extra. So I gave her some titles to choose from. I thought you might like the Black Stallion. That's pretty exciting.
Yeah.
So if y'all can do some reading aloud each day for 15 minutes, let me show you something that I made, and I'm going to put one in the mail for everybody. Hold on just a minute. I forgot to bring it down. So on my website, I have a lot of story charts that tell what all the different parts of the story are. Don't read those ever before you actually read the book, because they're plot spoilers. They tell everything about the book, all the main things, and I like to be surprised about how a book ends. Does anybody else feel like that? I get kind of aggravated if I find out how the book ends before I actually get a chance to read it. So, I made, huh?
I tried to access one of the books online, but it didn't seem to open up.
Oh, you were going to listen to one of them online?
Mm.
Okay. Hold on a minute. Okay. Let's see. All right. So besides the actual story chart that's attached to it, I've made these new bookmarks. So I'm going to put one in the mail for each of you. And I had them printed at next day flyers. And so what this does is it tells the 5 elements of literature. And the 5 elements of literature are characters, setting, conflict, plot, and theme. So I have just a little picture and a little description that shows you what these different parts mean. So for instance, characters. Characters are the people in the story. The main character is the protagonist. He or she is opposed by the antagonist. Usually there are also supporting characters of different types and importance. Okay?
Okay.
Setting. The setting is the world of the story. The setting includes the time, place, and mood of the story. It can be past, present, or future in the real world or a fantasy world. It can even be imaginary in the protagonist's brain. Now, conflict is maybe the most important part, okay? Because the conflict is what drives the story. The conflict is the main problem of the story that the protagonist tries to solve. The 5 types of conflict are man versus self, man versus society, man versus nature, and man versus God or fate. It can also be stated as a question. Will the protagonist be able to, whatever it is he's trying to solve is the problem, okay? the plot. Everybody's heard that word plot before, but it's an important word. The plot is the path of the story. The events and energy of the plot climb to a peak and then fall to rest at the end. There are 5 plot stages: exposition, rising action, climax, denouement, and resolution. And then theme is the last element. It's a very important one, though. The theme is the central idea or insight of the story. It shows what the author believes about human nature and life. Many stories share the same themes, such as survival, pride, good versus evil, revenge, or growing up. Okay?
Yes.
Okay. So we're going to be talking about these as we go. And what I'd like to do is read a really short story each time. Okay? So I'm going to open a story and read it to y'all. And I want you to listen. I'm picking the simplest one that's on my story charts, okay? Because it's a short one that we can actually finish in a real short amount of time. And then we're going to work on talking about these different parts of a story. So hold on just a minute. Let me get this open. All right, so this story is called Peter Rabbit. And so what I'm going to do is read the story, and we're going to be talking about the different parts of it, okay? Now, who has ever read the story of Peter Rabbit going into Mr. McGregor's garden? Okay. Well, it's a really short story, and it's really a children's story. But one thing about learning to analyze literature, the best way is to start with something really small, okay? And then branch out to other things. So I want everybody to listen, and I'm going to read this, and then we're going to talk about it, okay?
Okay.
Okay. The Tale of Peter Rabbit by Beatrix Potter. Once upon a time, there were 4 little rabbits, and their names were Flopsy, Mopsy, Cottontail, and Peter. They lived with their mother in a sandbank underneath the root of a very big fir tree. "Now, my dears," said old Mrs. Rabbit one morning, "you may go into the fields or down the lane, but don't go into Mr. McGregor's garden. Your father had an accident there. He was put into a pie by Mrs. McGregor. Now run along and don't get into mischief. I'm going out." Then old Mrs. Rabbit took a basket and her umbrella and went through the wood to the baker's. She bought a loaf of brown bread and 5 currant buns. Flopsy, Mopsy, and Cottontail, who were good little bunnies, went down the lane to gather blackberries. But Peter, who was very naughty, ran straight to Mr. McGregor's garden and squeezed under the gate. First, he ate some lettuces and some French beans. Then he ate some radishes. And then, feeling rather sick, he went to look for some parsley. But round the end of a cucumber frame, whom should he meet but Mr. McGregor? Mr. McGregor was on his hands and knees planting out young cabbages, but he jumped up and ran after Peter, waving a rake and calling out, "Stop, thief!" Peter was most dreadfully frightened. He rushed all over the garden, for he had forgotten the way to the gate. He lost one of his shoes among the cabbages and the other shoe amongst the potatoes. After losing them, he ran on 4 legs and went faster, so that I think he might have got away altogether if he had not unfortunately run into a gooseberry net and got caught by the large buttons on his jacket. It was a blue jacket with brass buttons, quite new. Peter gave himself up for lost and shed big tears, but his sobs were overheard by some friendly sparrows who flew to him in great excitement and implored him to exert himself. Mr. McGregor came up with a sieve, which he intended to pop upon the top of Peter, but Peter wriggled out just in time, leaving his jacket behind him, and rushed into the tool shed and jumped into a can. It would have been a beautiful thing to hide in, if it had not had so much water in it. Mr. McGregor was quite sure that Peter was somewhere in the tool shed, perhaps hidden underneath a flower pot. He began to turn them over carefully, looking under each. A bear? Presently, Peter sneezed. "Kerchoo!" Mr. McGregor was after him in no time and tried to put his foot upon Peter, who jumped out of a window, upsetting 3 plants. The window was too small for Mr. McGregor, and he was tired of running after Peter. He went back to his work. Peter sat down to rest. He was out of breath and trembling with fright, and he had not the least idea which way to go. Also, he was very damp with sitting in that can. After a time, he began to wander about, going lippity, lippity, not very fast, and looking all around. He found a door in a wall, but it was locked, and there was no room for a fat little rabbit to squeeze underneath. An old mouse was running in and out over the stone doorstep, carrying peas and beans to her family in the wood. Peter asked her the way to the gate, but she had such a large pea in her mouth that she could not answer. She only shook her head at him. Peter began to cry. Then he tried to find his way straight across the garden, but he became more and more puzzled. Presently, he came to a pond where Mr. McGregor filled his water cans. A white cat was staring at some goldfish. She sat very, very still, but now and then the tip of her tail twitched as if it were alive. Peter thought it best to go away without speaking to her. He had heard about cats from his cousin, little Benjamin Bunny. He went back to the tool shed, but suddenly, quite close to him, he heard the noise of a hoe. Scritch, scratch, scratch, scritch. Peter scuttered underneath the bushes. But presently, nothing happened. He came out and climbed upon a wheelbarrow and peeped over. The first thing he saw was Mr. McGregor hoeing onions. His back was turned toward Peter, and beyond him was the gate. Peter got down very quietly off the wheelbarrow and started running as fast as he could go along a straight walk behind some blackcurrant bushes. Mr. McGregor caught sight of him at the corner, but Peter did not care. He slipped underneath the gate and was safe at last in the wood outside the garden. Mr. McGregor hung up the little jacket and the shoes for a scarecrow to frighten the blackbirds. Peter never stopped running or looked behind him till he got home to the big fir tree. He was so tired that he flopped down upon the nice soft sand on the floor of the rabbit hole and shut his eyes. His mother was busy cooking. She wondered what he had done with his clothes. It was the second little jacket and pair of shoes that Peter had lost in a fortnight. I am sorry to say that Peter was not very well during the evening. His mother put him to bed and made some chamomile tea, and she gave a dose of it to Peter. 1 tablespoon to be taken at bedtime. But Flopsy, Mopsy, and Cottontail had bread and milk and blackberries for supper. Okay, very simple story, but a very well-written story because it has all the parts, okay? So let's look at this, and then I do actually have a story chart, which we're gonna look at together, but first we're gonna talk about it. So characters, who do you think is the main character in the story?
Peter Rabbit.
Peter Rabbit, that's right. And we kind of get a clue that maybe he is because his name is in the title, right? It's not always that way, but he's a very important person in this story. And so let's see. So we call the main character the protagonist. The protagonist is the person who's the main person of the story. Sometimes they're heroes. And sometimes they can even be criminals. But if they're the main character of the story, they're the protagonist, okay? So do you think Peter is a heroic main character?
No.
Yeah, he kind of has some character flaws, doesn't he? How would you describe him?
Naughty.
No.
Naughty, that's a great word. Any other contributions?
Mischievous.
Yes, I would agree. Okay. Irene, were you thinking of anything?
Greedy.
Greedy. How do we know he was greedy?
Because he snuck into his house.
Yeah, he ate lettuces and I forget what all it listed there, right?
Lettuce and parsley.
Oh, that's right. That's right. Okay. So he's the protagonist. He's the main character. Who is opposing him in the story?
Mr. McGregor.
Yes. He wants to catch Peter, right? So he's trying to stop Peter from getting away, right? Okay, do we know, can we remember any other characters that were part of the story? Do you remember any of those names?
Flopsy, Mopsy, and Cottontail.
Yes, Flopsy, Mopsy, and Cottontail. Very poetic names there. And then, of course, there's old Mrs. McGregor, his mother, right? So they're important characters, but they're not the main characters, okay? And usually a story does have a protagonist and an antagonist, and then there'll be different characters depending on how long the story is, okay? The longer a story is, the more characters you're usually going to find, all right? So the setting is the world of the story, and the author creates this world, and they open the door for you to come into the story. So what are some things you can remember from the story that describe the setting of the story?
It was in his house.
Okay, he has a house, and did you all catch where the house was? The fir tree, exactly. They lived in a cozy little burrow in a big fir tree, okay? I'm assuming it was under the roots, probably. Okay, what's another part of the setting where the story takes place? This is a really important part.
Garden.
Exactly, Mr. McGregor's garden. That's a really important part of the setting, isn't it? Okay. All right, good job. All right, now the conflict is the main problem of the story. And it's always the protagonist that has the main problem. Other people might have the same problem, but the one we're interested in is the one that the protagonist has. So what's Peter's main problem here in this story?
Veggies.
Huh?
I said vegetables.
Yeah, what does Peter need or want once the story really gets going? What's he trying to do for most of that part of the story?
Escape.
He wants to escape, right? He wants to get away from Mr. McGregor. He wants to get out of Mr. McGregor's garden. And first he can't because he ate so much that he couldn't squeeze under the gate, right? And then he saw Mr. McGregor, and Mr. McGregor was chasing him everywhere, and he got stuck in the potting shed in a can of water. Huh?
He got lost.
And he got lost. So his main thing is he's trying his best to get out of that garden so he can get back home, right? So that's his problem. Will Peter be able to get out of the garden and get back home? So there's 5 types of problems you can have: man versus man, man versus society, man versus self, man versus nature, and man versus God or fate. He's being opposed from leaving the garden by Mr. McGregor, right? And so I would say this is a man versus man conflict. He's being opposed literally by a man, okay?
Yes.
Okay, if it's a bunch of people that are opposing the character, then it's considered man versus society, okay? So this is a man versus man conflict. Now the plot is the path that the story takes. And it starts out by we get to meet the main characters and learn a little bit about them. And that happens at the beginning when they talk about Peter and his family, and his mother says, "Don't go into Mr. McGregor's garden. Your father had an accident there. He was put into a pie by Mrs. McGregor." And so that's setting the story up. And then that's what we call the exposition. It's like going to a play. Who's ever been to a play in this class? Any of y'all been to a play before?
No.
Okay, so when you go to a play, Anirudh, you're sitting in the audience, and there's these big heavy curtains, and the curtains open, and then you see who's in the play. You see what kind of setting it is. Like there'll be furniture, or there'll be landscapes painted, or a cityscape painted. And so you walk into, you're entering into the world of the story through that. That's what we call the exposition. As soon as the exposition gets set and you're you've gotten into the story and you're comfortable in this part of the world, then the author takes you to the problem.
Yeah.
Okay. And then immediately the character starts trying to solve this problem.
Oh, okay.
And as they try to solve the problem, for instance, Peter getting out of the garden, things get more and more and more tense, right? They get more and more and more tense until we get to the very peak of the story, and the character either succeeds in solving their problem or they fail. But either way, the problem is going to be over. Okay. So does Peter solve his problem? Is he successful in solving his problem about getting out of the garden?
No, he gets stuck. Yeah.
Okay. Eventually, though, is he successful?
Yes.
Okay. And that peak of the story is what we call the climax. That's where everything comes to a point in the story. And then as soon as that problem gets solved, then we start going down the other side of the story. And that's what we call the denouement, where we find out what happens after the problem. And then it should come to a nice, smooth landing at the end. You ever read a story or watched a movie where the problem got solved and then all of a sudden, boom, it was over? And you never found out what happened to everybody?
Yeah, I hate that.
Really annoying in a story, right?
Yes.
And in the conclusion, Peter doesn't get to have any of the blackberries and milk for supper. He gets sent to bed because he has a tummy ache. No wonder he ate so much. And his sisters get milk and bread and blackberries for supper. And that's the conclusion. So I'm going to show you this story chart that I made. And actually, my daughter made the story chart, and it's really a nice one. And we're going to see all these parts that I just talked to you about. Okay. Most of my story charts are not this fancy. This is the only one that I have that's this fancy. Let's see. Okay, so this is the tale of Peter Rabbit. Got the name up there at the top. Let me make this a little smaller. Okay. So here we list the setting of the story. The story happens in Peter's home in the sandbank and in Mr. McGregor's garden. This is what we call the setting. The characters, the main character, protagonist, Peter Rabbit, a mischievous and disobedient bunny. Two of the words that we used. The bad guy, enemy, opponent, antagonist. Mr. McGregor, a farmer who tries to catch Peter. Other important characters, Flopsy, Mopsy, Cottontail, and Mrs. Rabbit. Okay, so there are characters. Now we have, let's see, hold on a second. All right, so here's the theme. The theme of this story is survival. Peter wants to survive, and it's also the importance of obedience. Was Peter obedient? Would you describe Peter as obedient?
No.
Yeah, he was frankly naughty, as Maya said. And here's the conflict. It's a man versus man. Actually, it's also man versus self, because Peter is having to overcome himself to be able to get out of that garden, but it's mostly man versus man. Will Peter escape from Mr. McGregor? Will Peter learn to discipline himself to obey? All right.
No,
I wonder if it had a good effect on him. What do you think?
I don't think it did.
You don't think he learned any lesson from it?
No.
Maybe not. So then here's what we're talking about. When I talk about the 5 plot stages, the exposition, the rising action, the climax, the denouement, and the conclusion. So in the exposition, this is where we step into the world of the story here. A fatherless bunny family. Let's see if I can bring this down a little bit. A fatherless bunny family lives, let's see. Well, wait a second. Lives in a sandbank. Mother bunny leaves for the store. She gives them instructions. Don't go into Mr. McGregor's garden. Okay. Then we meet the problem, the conflict. Peter disobeys and goes into Mr. McGregor's garden to eat vegetables. That's what starts the conflict. Mr. McGregor chases him. Peter gets lost. He almost gets caught several times. He loses his jacket and shoes and finds the door, but is too fat to squeeze under it. He becomes more and more confused and lost. The climax. Finally, Peter spots the gate that he has to get past Mr. McGregor. Peter makes a dash for it. Mr. McGregor chases after him, but Peter reaches the gate and squeezes under it. He doesn't stop running until he gets home. In the denouement is a French word meaning the unraveling. Peter flops down on the floor of the burrow and goes to sleep. Mr. McGregor takes his jacket and shoes and uses them to make a scarecrow for his garden. So this is what happens after the problem is solved. And then in the conclusion, Peter doesn't feel well after his huge meal and scary adventure. His mother puts him to bed and gives him a dose of chamomile tea. His sisters have bread, milk, and blackberries for supper. So a very simple story, but all stories that are well written have all of these same parts. They will just be different in how they play out, okay? So I'm going to send one of these to each of you so you can stick it in whatever book you're reading.
Mm-hmm.
And you can always think about who's the main character, what's the setting, the world of the story, what's the main problem that the character's trying to solve, what's the path that the story is taking, and what is the main idea of the story. The main idea in this story is survival and the importance of obedience.
Yes.
Okay, so does anybody have anything they'd like to say or share about this story?
No.
No.
No? Okay. All right, so probably what we will end up doing each time in class, I have lots of short stories that I can read, and talking about short stories is the best way to learn how to solve them, learn how to analyze them. So we'll be reading probably a very short story each time just to practice this skill. And then when you're listening to the book being read by your parent, then you can think about these things. So Katie, actually there are like 4 main characters in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. Do you know who they are?
Lucy, Edmund, Peter, and Susan.
Exactly. And what kind of problem do you think they're trying to solve?
We're trying to get past the White Witch and go to, I keep on messing up the name of the thrones, but there are like 4 and they're trying to get to them.
Okay, so, and really they're trying to defeat the White Witch, right? She claims to be the Queen of Narnia, but is she really?
No.
No.
Ben loves that book.
Who?
Benjamin, the little boy that stayed over, he's coming again in 2 weeks, and he always sits with us with his little rain boots and sits with us and just waits for me to start reading.
Oh, that is wonderful. That is wonderful. Let's see. So Maya, y'all haven't started reading read aloud yet. Okay, I have a story chart online for Black Beauty, but don't read it, and y'all don't read the one on Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe until you're finished with the book, okay? Because I don't want to spoil it for you. Although Maya, you already know how Black Beauty ends, and I guess Katie, you already know how Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe ends, unless you haven't read it before.
I have never read it. I read older books. So.
Okay. So don't look at my story chart then, because I don't want to spoil the ending for you. Okay?
Okay.
Okay. Now, Anirudh, I think you would really like the Black Stallion. Anirudh, you said your family is originally from India.
Yes.
Well, the Black Stallion actually starts out in India.
Okay.
And it's a very exciting story. Have you other two read Black Beauty before? I mean, the Black Stallion before? I read it for the first time this past summer. I never read it when I was younger. So I read it and I just loved it. So the Black Stallion, I like to read books like Black Stallion, Black Beauty, Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. You know, It's okay to read books that are written for younger people. If it's a very well-written story, it doesn't matter what age group it was written for. Like Peter Rabbit, what age group do you think Peter Rabbit was probably written for?
Probably like 5-year-olds. And
Yeah, little kids, right? But
Yeah.
Beatrix Potter did an excellent job plotting out that story and describing the characters and helping us see Mr. McGregor's garden, right? So it really doesn't matter that it was probably written for 5-year-olds. It's an excellent story. So don't ever discount a book just because you think it was written for younger people. Okay?
Okay.
All right. Do y'all have any other questions or anything that you would like to add?
no, ma'am.
Okay. So Maya, y'all get your paper, your PDF uploaded like you saw Katie's, and I do have all of the sheets made that are in your handbook. I just need to go ahead and put them up on the assignment page for assignment number 2, and the rest of them I just haven't actually posted them. I was just trying to get the first one up there. It's always kind of tricky the very first year with a new course, getting everything set up like it's supposed to be on ThinkWave. Okay, but I will take care of that before tomorrow. All right. Okay, well, if nobody has any questions, basically what you're going to be doing this next time is continuing to work on your poem, whichever one you're actually working on. And I want y'all to make sure you go back and recite the ones you've already learned. Don't let those go dormant in your head, okay?
Okay.
Did everybody find that page in their handbook that?
Yeah.
Okay, so you can just be keeping, huh?
Well, sorry. Me and my mom kind of like didn't understand it, so we put check marks on the dates that we read the poems, but we don't really understand what to do.
Oh, okay. Let's see. Let me just see if I can help you with that. Yeah. So we're in September now, right?
Mm-hmm.
And each of the poems has a number. So what is today? This is the 23rd. So for the 23rd of September, you would put a check mark on September 23rd for saying that you actually practiced all the poems that you have learned or either that you're working on, okay? So you would do that for today, all right? It's just a way to make sure that you're keeping up with it. And I would circle each of these as you go. So like, y'all have all done ooey gooey, so you can circle that on this page, I think it's page 6 in your handbook. And you've all done celery, so circle it. And whichever one you're working on, circle the ones that you actually, as you start to work on them and you continue to practice them. So Katie would have done all the way up to after the party. So Katie should have 1 through 5 circled, okay? But y'all will have this whole thing filled in here that you've actually practiced. You'll have a check mark for each day that you practice, okay? You don't have to practice them over the weekend unless you want to.
Okay.
All right. So see if you can find somebody to say a poem to. Anna Reed, you said you might do it for your sister when you talk to her. Have you recited for her yet?
No, well, actually, I'm going to Alabama tomorrow. I can't recite it for her then.
Yes, recite some poems to her. There's nothing like having an audience to recite for.
Yes.
Maya, you can recite to your little brother and to Sophia. Okay. All right.
I usually recite to my mom.
Okay, that's good. But I want y'all to entertain people. Okay.
Okay.
Reciting poetry for people used to be a form of recreation. And it's a great thing to do for people. So try reciting your poem to somebody besides your editor this time, okay? Sounds like Katie's already doing that.
Yeah, I for how entertaining my poems are.
So I want you to find somebody, and at the next class, y'all can tell me who you entertained with your poem. Okay?
Okay.
All right. And I'll be seeing my little granddaughter this weekend because I'm going to a family wedding. And I think I'll probably recite ooey gooey and celery for her. And maybe the little man who wasn't there. So I will have a report for you next time.
My boyfriend's little sister, she loves the poems.
Oh, that's wonderful. Kids
Started
always enjoy these, but adults will enjoy them too. You know, it's a lost art, reciting poetry for people. It's a good thing to know how to do.
Yeah, she started reading them, and she memorized ooey gooey and celery. And she's working on the Vulture right now. I'm just surprised at how smart she is.
That's wonderful. Okay, you guys, unless you have any other questions, I'll see you next time. Thank you. It was so much fun. I really enjoyed myself.
Bye.
Roll.
Bye.